Howdy, y'all. Today, I want to give you a little bit of a primer on a serious issue that is going on in America today, and that is the disappearance of small and medium sized farms across the country. I just want to address briefly some of the key problems, just very high level, and hopefully give you the beginning of an understanding of why this is such a big issue and why farmers are struggling out there. And not only why farmers are struggling, but also on the flip side of that, why industrial farms are gobbling up everything in sight and really replacing these small and medium farms that have been the core of America for so long. So the first issue is the fact that farming just doesn't generate a whole lot of money in a lot of cases. And when I say farming, I'm talking about what you probably just think of as regular farming, the kind of crop or livestock farming of corn or soybeans or beef cattle or dairy cattle or a hog farm or that sort of thing. It really just doesn't generate much money. You're looking, depending on the crop, depending on what you're growing, of course, there's always some variability there. But after all your costs are taken care of on a good year, you're looking at maybe a few $100s an acre for your crop. Really, the reality is when you're talking about crop or livestock farming, a farmer is doing generally everything they can just to break even every year, not to really make much any money. One of the big reasons for this is cash crops have been gutted in today's society. Cash crops used to be very important. You're looking at things like tobacco, cotton, indigo, hemp, and other potential cash crops that you can grow and sell for much, much more money than regular food crops like corn or soybeans or livestock, right? And from a lot of different aspects, these cash crops just aren't a viable option like they used to be. Tobacco is a great example. Tobacco's been demonized by the government for so long that the value and demand for tobacco has gone down a lot. And therefore, it's something that used to actually do a lot towards sustaining farmers, even if they weren't just tobacco farmers, would likely have a tobacco patch. In fact, a friend of mine that his family owns a beef cattle farm, and he told me that, the beef cattle was what you did to break even. And if we made any money that year, it was from the tobacco patch that they would always plant. They were beef cattle farmers, but what actually put them over the break-even point was that tobacco, were those cash crops. And this has always been an issue with farmers, even back very, very early in our history. You look at things like the Whiskey Rebellion, and that whiskey effectively almost being a cash crop for the farmers, and because of things going on at the time, that way to actually support their family being taken away or severely limited. So that's a big problem. These cash crops are just not as viable or available anymore, oftentimes for government regulation or other government interference. And at the end of the day, it's all dependent on the weather, right? Even a good year, you might do all right. You might get even a little above the break-even point, but all you have to have is a bad year, and all of a sudden all that's gone out the window. It's so bad that many small farms are running with income from an outside job. The farmer may literally be working 2 full-time jobs, running his farm and working what we might call a normal job just to make ends meet. That's how bad it is. And it gets to the high cost of everything, right? The cost of farming is astronomical, and it's gotten much, much worse over time. Used to farming was not really that expensive, and it's gotten so bad from regulation and a lot of different reasons. Equipment. If you're familiar with farm equipment at all, you'll know that it's extremely expensive, especially anything of any size that's necessary for any kind of large-scale farming that isn't putting a garden in your backyard. If you're actually going to plant many acres, you need some heavy duty equipment, and this stuff can cost nearly as much or maybe more than your house or even the property that you're farming. It's so extremely expensive, and you're talking about taking out 20, 30-year loans to pay for the farm equipment that you need to make money from farming where you're already barely making ends meet. Another loan may have to be taken out every single year for seed, just to plant. If you're planting, you may have to take out a loan just to be able to plant your crop and hope that it does well. You also think about fertilizer and insecticide. Those things are very expensive as well. You also think about, especially for livestock farming, you're talking about a lot of feed to get your livestock to the point that you can actually sell it. Same issue. It's extremely expensive. And so by the time you actually get your product to market, you get your crop to market, you get your livestock to market, you're already spent so much money that you're, again, barely making ends meet, if that. And again, you have a bad day, you have a bad year, and that could all go up in smoke in a matter of days. Also, crop insurance is another thing that's quite expensive that if things do have if you do have a bad year, hopefully you don't literally lose everything that you own because you have so much debt out there, and crop insurance is expensive too. Many of the new technologies that are out there, as there is always new tech being made for farming, is often cost prohibitive to the small and medium farmers, giving the large industrial farms an even greater edge. And let's be real, farming is a lot of work. It is a lot of work, even with modern technology. When something has to be done, when you've got to bring in a crop, when you've got to put out a crop, you've got to milk the cows, whatever the case might be, that's a lot of work, and you work until it's done. If it's got to be done, it's time sensitive. And that means morning, noon, and night for potentially many days to get those things taken care of, or you can lose everything. It's a lot of work, and it's often just not practical to try and run a farm that is already a huge amount of work and then also work a job that's actually keeping you afloat in the first place. It's so cost prohibitive to actually run any kind of commercial farm. And then there is a lot of government regulation in all of this and interference in general. I've kind of mentioned it some already, but again, cost of everything is high. Cost of farming equipment is high. Cost of we know from whether we farm or not, we know that everything's gone up. And when we understand what the government has done to the economy through overregulation and overtaxing, not only do costs go up to account for the excess cost of overregulation, but they also have to account for the cost of taxes and that sort of thing. All throughout the production process, from producer to consumer, there's a lot of taxes and a lot of costs that reduce the spending power of our dollar by a huge, huge margin and cause prices to go up by a huge, huge margin. And it affects farmers perhaps worse than most people because of the very things that we've been talking about. There's so much of a high investment cost, and while that is typical for commercial farms, small and medium farms have a very hard time making that work. Again, those large amounts of debt and all of that. There's efficiencies of scale available to the large industrial farms that really help them stay ahead of the curve. But for the small and medium farms, they don't have that efficiencies of scale that helps them save money and make more money in the long term. And so they're always staying just above the watermark, just barely hanging on all the time. Farming philosophy, research, technology tends to focus on this general commercial farming that's been common for several decades now, instead of the perhaps more sustainable techniques. Farmers don't grow their own food. People may think that today, but they grow somebody else's food. They grow 300 acres, they grow 500 acres of corn or soybeans or whatever the case might be, whatever they're doing. And that is sold, and then that money is trying to keep everything afloat. You're not necessarily keeping much, if anything, of what it is that you're growing in a lot of cases because, again, of that common practice or standard practice among commercial farms. And then mega corporations also are consolidating and monopolizing all the time. They increase their power, and they force small and medium farms out. And there's some great resources. This is just a primer. Check out the Lonesome Lands YouTube channel. I'll link it in the description below as well. He really goes into a lot of detail about cattle ranching and a lot of the issues that I'm talking about today in more detail, and he knows it better than I do. Would highly recommend you check that out. I hope that this has been a informative episode for you. I hope that it's piqued your curiosity. This is something I want to go into more detail in the future on, and I hope that it's something that you recognize the importance of. But anyway, don't forget all of our social media, all that sort of stuff that's in the description. If you like what you saw, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And remember, friends, as long as you and I are doing what's right, we make a real difference in this whole world. Ryan Dalton, the Kentuckian, signing off.